everybody, and at least good evening in Copenhagen, where I'm Jonas Paul-Plesner, Executive Director in the Alliance of Democracies Foundation. I'm delighted here to host this town hall that we're doing on Biden Summit for Democracy, and basically sort of our thoughts on that. I think this is a really great opportunity that we have in the democracy promotion community, that this summit is upcoming. So it's also really up to us to help shape it into something that we will think will really substantially promote democracy. Let me mention sort of two small things. First, Alliance of Democracies Foundation did together with Latana, we do this yearly Democracy Perception Index. And this year we included a question on Biden Summit for Democracy and global opinions on whether it was a good or a bad idea. We gave people a relatively sort of simple option. And I do encourage you to take a look at the data yourself with all the different countries. But let me highlight that globally, 55% think such a summit is a good idea. For CENAP, actually, one of the highest was 80% support in Nigeria, and contrasted with 18% support for it in Russia. In the US, that actually fit a little bit of the global level at 56%. Denmark was higher than that at 60%. So that gives a little bit of sort of an impression of it, but I think at least the global positive is a figure to retain. Second thing I wanted to mention before kicking us off is that we also launched here at this summit a charter for an alliance of democracies for Rasmussen, but also co-signed by Daniel Twining, Derek Mitchell. There are two of our speakers here today. It had sort of three simple ideas. One was a sort of a pushback on authoritarianism. The second was setting standards, tech standards for the free world. And thirdly, supporting democracy champions both at home and abroad. And it's also part of our initial suggestions for what we think potentially a Biden summit among democracies potentially could achieve. But it's not that I want to preempt the debate with that charter, because I really want us to have this sort of big open town hall where we bring in lots of ideas. So I have this eminent group of speakers with me that will chip in with their ideas on what the Biden Summit for Democracy could achieve, the questions of what countries to bring in, what about democratic countries that are backsliding, what about fragile democracies that are just kind of climbing their way up, what about how do you get this also to be really a civil society event, so that it's precisely a summit for democracy, not just for democracies. So all these are questions we have a really great group to address. I'll mention very briefly the speakers, and then I'll turn over to them. So we have Colombe, Cahen-Salvador, who is co-founder of NOW, a grassroots movement for democracy. Derek Mitchell, president at the National Democratic Institute. Lisbeth Pilago, who is the executive director at the Danish Institute for Parties and Democracy, and is also the executive committee chair at the European Endowment for Democracy. One of our, like NDI and RI, one of our partners as well. Yetzel Roman is the Deputy Minister for Foreign Affairs of the Dominican Republic, and also, if I recall correctly, a former IRI fellow, right, Yetzel? And we have CENAP, Sulaiman Umar, who is the Executive Director at Initiative for Public Awareness and Development, abbreviated IPAD, from Nigeria, who's been here at the summit with us in 2019 physically. We hope it will be possible again at some point. And last but definitely not least, we have Dan Twining, the president of the International Republican Institute, IRI. So I will start in that order that I introduce people. So Colombe, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be having this conversation with such amazing speakers as well, and I can't wait to hear from the audience. I think before starting to discuss directly what, how, and why the Summit for Democracy should be taking place, it's important to understand why democracies in the first place should be working together with civil society, with businesses, with citizens, and so on. And then we can understand how such a summit should interact with all of those actors. It's pretty clear that in today's world, democracy is backsliding, not only in authoritarian regimes, but also in democratic countries themselves. And there's also a strong, compelling narrative that is being created from authoritarian regimes such as China that is actually working very well when you look at how the population in those countries are reacting to the narrative, that democratic countries are often having issues encountering. And so for those two reasons, I think it's really important for democracies in the first place to start to unite, to work together to protect freedom fighters in their countries, to protect democracy, but also to hold one another accountable at home for those countries that are backsliding. And then maybe even more importantly, to innovate democracy. So to look at the future, at how to create a compelling narrative of democracy, basically how to make democracy sexy again in the eyes of citizens. So from this point on, from the moment we agree that there's a need for democracies to unite because alone countries are very weak in the face of authoritarianism and the face of the authoritarianism narrative, I think the Biden Summit for Democracy can be a starting point to the conversation and to bring in countries that would form this unity of democracies. But there's a few elements that have to align for it to work, in my opinion. One of them is, and this is considering the fact that we have very little details so far as to what it would look like. The first one is that it needs to be very inclusive of all democracies. So what I mean is it can't be led by the US alone or the traditional Western powers that have for way too long have too much power and created some of the issues with democracies that we're facing today. So it has to be inclusive to every single democracy on earth. And we're seeing this because I was actually reading the data, Jonas, that you just mentioned from the Alliance of Democracies. And I think in the people that you polled and surveyed, 44% of respondents believe that the US threatened democracy in their own countries. So from this point on, it would be very presumptuous to think that the US, led by President Biden alone, could be setting an agenda that would then be followed and trusted by the rest of the world. So beyond being inclusive, I think citizens must be able to participate directly. I was thrilled when I read that President Biden wants to include civil society. And I know that my organization would love to be invited, like many, many others. And a lot of businesses will be joining and voicing different interests. But I think it's important for citizens, and especially young people, to be able to have a direct participation in it. Because for democracy to be a relevant topic, it has to be anchored in local realities and in people's day-to-day problems. And this often is not reflected in high-level conversations about democracy in the first place. It's very high level and very far away from people's everyday concerns. And so you need to have direct participation of citizens that can themselves as well formulate policy recommendations for the different governments, businesses, and organizations to then push through. And then the last point is, I think the summit needs to have a very strong focus on innovation and on the future. So I mentioned it before, but what I found out in my work at now, and we're pushing a lot for the creation of such a League of Democracies, and the summit would be a first step, is that the narrative is not working right now. People have no reason to rally behind democracy when they don't necessarily feel on a day-to-day basis the backsliding in a lot of countries. And in the rest, sometimes it's difficult to galvanize the population around democracy. So I think we need to look to forward-looking countries, for example, Taiwan, on how they're handling new technologies, new trends to be able to innovate democracy. I'm thinking, for example, about digital democracy. And then we need to have a conversation about how to make democracy really global. So for example, through transnational governance, global governance that is democratic, which we don't have yet. So to keep it very brief, that's all. And I just think we need to make sure that it's inclusive, that citizens can have a say, and that we look to the future, not only to the problems, to be able to provide hope and a vision.
Thanks, Colombe. Very good observations. Let me just do a shameless plug. When you mentioned Taiwan, that the Taiwan president, Tsai Ing-wen, was speaking today at the Copenhagen Democracy Summit, all of course virtual. So if some here hadn't seen that, you can go back and look at it. Now let me turn to Derek Mitchell next on my list.
Well, thank you, Jonas, and hello, everybody. It's great to be part of this panel. I'm awed by the people represented here, some of whom I know very well. I have to say, I wish I were there in Copenhagen. I think everyone here is going to say that. So next year, can't believe it's 2 years since I first went. And I want to associate with all the remarks that my colleague Colombe just said. I think that's precisely right. I do hope the Biden administration is listening to those voices. I think the notion of it being a summit being inclusive is absolutely essential, and inclusive in every sense of the term, inclusive in terms of the types of individuals that come to it, inclusive of government and non-government, private sector, public sector, inclusive of not just the West, but a broad cross-section of the globe, because what we're talking about here is a universal value, and that must be represented at the table, that democracy is universal, not simply a Western concept or a concept for just a privileged few. I would also say that democracy is aspirational. So I would hope, and I expect that the Biden administration, as you say, in consultation, I hope, with other nations, other democratic nations as they organize, think about what kind of commitments the country will bring. This is not just something that is given or that folks will be expected from this summit, but should be expected to present, to bring something to the table in order for themselves to demonstrate that commitment to the aspiration of democracy. There's no democracy in the world. And this was true 5 years ago, 10 years ago in the United States. We were never perfect. We were always seeking to be a more perfect union. We need to come to the table more than ever, the United States, with commitments ourselves to say what we will do in order to make our democracy stronger and to reverse some of the trends that are underway in the United States. And I think every country should come to the table similarly with some things they would choose to do internally to make their democracy stronger going forward. I think that's very, very important, so that there is some, and I know the administration is thinking about a kind of price of admission, the humility part of this, that we as democracies come with humility. At the same time, we come with absolute confidence that democracy is the form of government that works best and that affirms human dignity. And there is no shame or no defensiveness about it. I also think, related to that, that this should not just be, as you say, it's a summit for democracy, which means it should be a celebration. It should be a celebration because democracy represents hope. Democracy represents optimism. Democracy represents openness, all the things that we approve of, excuse me. I do think that we should be thinking in a very positive way about this, and not just be something that's defensive, that we're preventing something, that we're opposing something, but that we are affirming something that's very, very important. So I hope that as the Biden administration presents this, that it does so in that way. I should also say two more points, if I can get it in through my dog who wants to speak. One is that it is important that there be firm commitments coming out of it, that there be an agenda coming out, and it's not just a moment, but that it is a process that outlives this one single moment. And then one final thing I want to say is that this should be something that I think we in the democracy field just assume democracy is good, democracy is right. And when we put out various statements about democracy, it sort of says, here's our agenda. I think we need to be very strong in this, summit and before and after, why democracy matters, why this is not just nice, why it's not just values that we approve of, but why it is strategically sound, why it works for the world in a very hard, realpolitik way, why it is in our security interest, why it is in our mutual strategic interest that democracy and democratic values prevail. So I hope that this is not just a celebration, assuming everyone is going to believe in this, but that we are making the hard case to our own countries, to those who may think this is something sort of general and superfluous, that this is hard thinking, this is real, and that it is messages to our own countries that this democracy and democratic values are here to stay, and that we will be affirming it in our policy going forward. So with that, I just want to, you gave us just a couple minutes. There's a lot to say on this, but just as main points, I want to open up with that. So thank you, Jonas.
Thank you, Derek. And I can hear you, as we all found out, your dog concurs. It wants to celebrate democracy, and maybe it also wants to go for a walk. And so next in line, I have Lisbeth Pilago. Let me say to the audience already, you're doing exactly the right thing. I can see questions piling up in the Q&A. And you're also allowed later to raise your hands. And if you actually have your own sort of ideas for the summit, we will promote you to so that everybody can see you on screen as well. And some of the questions I might and others try to enter in the chat, while so we also just have a debate going on there simultaneously. And that's how democracy is often unruly, with people expressing their point of view in all directions. Lisbeth, the word is yours.
Thank you so much, Jonas. And I can only concur with the previous speakers as well in their very good points. I think it's the summit is welcomed, it's timely, it's needed. And yes, it's early stages, so there are lots of questions of the process and the content. But I think the occasion and the calling for it is very important. And as mentioned before, also the whole issue about we all have national agendas and we all have our international agendas, and they need to find a balance in such a meeting. But I think it's an opportunity to reaffirm the importance of democratic governance. And we've had 15 years of decline when it comes to democracy globally. So certainly there is need for a meeting. And it has the potential to really be supporting real democratic change. However, as also mentioned, it needs to be not a one-off. I think that's important, that we've seen many big political statements around the world being one-offs. I think it's important that there's a global backing and there is an agreement that there needs to be some kind of commitments that will be followed up. It's like a party we've all been waiting for, in particular, perhaps during these COVID times, we've been missing meeting up. So it's also a party where everyone is wondering who's going to be invited. And we're also a party where we'll be wondering what would be the entry fee. We talked about there needs to be some kind of commitment for countries to participate. At the same time, as also mentioned before, the issue of inclusion, I think, is really crucial, that as many as possible join such a summit. Also, countries that are having larger challenges in terms of democracy. Otherwise, we will end up with a closed gathering of family members that we already agree with, and I think that might not necessarily do anything good for the future of our planet. So hopefully it will provide hope for our for populations, for citizens around the world, and as mentioned by Colombe, the inclusivity and the ability of as many as possible to join in different ways and use technology, use the opportunity we've all learned during the COVID-19 of engagement, getting more young people to engage, citizens who otherwise would not feel they have a voice. I think that would be important. And at the same time, appeal to our political leadership, that this is also a time of leadership, that we need to see that leadership. In many countries, there is a huge challenge of political fatigue among populations, lack of trust in our political system. And I think we need to also find ways of re-engaging with youth in politics as a fundament for our democracies. We have a job to do for that also in Europe, in our own continent where I come from. So I think there is an appetite among different democracy actors that we belong to of joining and supporting both the development and the content of the summit. So we hope that it will be joined by not only member states and political leaders of countries, but also civil society, private sector, and populations as such. So basically, we hope that such a summit could be a reset for our democracy compass, or our GPS rather, that we could join forces and hopefully, as the democracy support actors, which is also part of this group that are speaking today, I think we have a particular role and responsibility of both adding to such a summit, but also looking at our own role in how we do our work in democracy support, and together with donors have real discussions about what we've seen have worked throughout the years and what we should do better in our kind of work. We haven't touched upon what COVID-19 has done. I know there are many other events during the summit, this Copenhagen Democracy Summit that does that. But I think one issue that really came up from the assessment done is that economic inequality seems to be the major trigger, but also the major issue that is hindering developments of democracies. So there, I think we all have a job, and the summit hopefully will not limit to too few themes, but have a very broad aspect on how to solve some of the global challenges in our world. Comes to climate, also inequality and so on. I'll stop here so we have time for all the questions among the audience.
Thank you, Lisbeth. Next on my list is Yatsel Roman, Deputy Minister. I mean, I also wanted to add that you also have a background, you know, as a civil society activist and an RI fellow. So I also wanted you to give kind of both perspectives, of course, now from a government perch, but also from having been, I would say, also on the other side of how you see what is it we need actually also for democracies in transition and to keep improving.
Thank you so much. Of course, as Mr. Mitchell said, most of us would have liked to be in Copenhagen today, specifically considering that just a few months ago, Netflix Latin America was broadcasting Borgen, the series. So it's quite popular at the moment. Would have liked to visit, but hopefully next year or whenever that might be. So as Jonas very well mentioned, I have only been in government for the past 9 months. Before that, I was an opposition leader, but also a civil society leader. So I see different perspectives. And as many of you know, in the year 1994, the United States called on the first Summit of the Americas, which, although was not focused directly on the matter of democracy, it was supposed to invite the democracies of the Western Hemisphere. It was a very happy time, considering that most civil wars in Latin America had ended, most dictatorships had been also left behind. It was happier times. However, sadly, this year, it's supposed to be the next Summit of the Americas. It's supposed to be in the United States, but we cannot say that these are happy times, democratically speaking. We're at a worse moment than we were 27 years ago. When you look at what's happening in countries that I don't have to mention, some of their representatives have spoken today, it's a very worrying time. However, COVID has made it even all the harder, considering that anxieties were present, considering that extremist messages were rising, and also considering that populism had become so popular that even formerly democratic sectors had taken on the discourse that seeks to destroy the institutions of democracy. And this is one of the biggest challenges that we have at the moment. It's that even though we, at least all of us here, all of us watching this summit, believe in the values of democracy, but we have to admit that the other message, the authoritarian message, tends to be more popular because it tends to be simpler, considering that democracy is not an end in itself, but the means. And these populist sectors, these authoritarian sectors tend to present their authority as the end in itself. And well, Colombe mentioned the importance, and Mr. Mitchell also followed up on it, on that this doesn't need to be just a government discussion. And I could not agree more. For the past 2 Summit of the Americas, we actually organized many side events. We actually participated in the civil society meetings. We participated in the business meetings. We participated in the academic meetings, because this is kind of a cliche saying, but democracy is too important to be left to politicians. And the challenges that are present go way beyond just governments. However, it is important that partners, democratic partners, governments beyond the Western world participate actively. And I know, and this was something that Mr. Twining and Mr. Mitchell actually mentioned, and I think it was Politico, where even the list of invitations can be a bit controversial, because there are countries that can still be democratic, but they're seeing a backslide. There are countries that perhaps are not, but want to be seen as such, and will see this as a public relations opportunity. So this presents a challenge, but it's a challenge that has to be answered by the Biden administration. And why the Biden administration? Traditionally, the US has been the biggest promoter of institutions worldwide. So it would not be an effort that could be ignored. It would be an effort that would definitely work towards bringing together partners that for the past few years have not sadly seeing the support from those kind of problems. Because as you very well mentioned, Jonas, and Mr. Mitchell also mentioned, no country has achieved a perfect democracy. No country has achieved a state where they have a vaccine against extremism, but some countries have taken a few steps further than countries that are represented even in this summit. Latin America has seen elected governments for the past 40 years, but sadly, the extremist representatives have been able to use elections to promote and even be elected on those destructionist platforms. We saw it in Venezuela, where a free, a fair, a credible election in 1998 meant the collapse of the country that had the biggest democratic tradition in the Latin American region. So, of course, even though some countries might think, well, this is a problem that only affects those specific nations in peril, the truth is none of us are free from such an outcome. So it's important that this summit brings together those different sectors. And I know we have, for instance, the experiences of ideological organizations that bring together liberals, that bring together conservatives, that bring together social democrats, that bring together the Greens and the likes. But no matter our differences when it comes to economic policy, no matter our difference when it comes to at least social policy, no matter our difference even to the way that we see certain aspects of the world, we have to agree that those differences have to be decided on a free and fair democratic platform. And we have to know that we must compete on, of course, all of that, but we have to agree on the basis of democratic institutions. So just to end at this very moment, I will stress that this has to go beyond government. And I say that as a government representative, but also with my experience in the civil society sector. And I say that this is an opportunity too big to let it go. The US at the moment has the credibility, has the expectation from a change of government, has at least the benefit of the doubt from most countries. So this is a time as good as any to bring together, knowing that this will not be an end all be all, but it would be a celebration of democracy, but also a way to lay out the roadmap to the strengthening of democracy, knowing full well that the perils never end. This isn't a fairy tale where we live happily ever after. We do not see those endings in democratic struggles, but if we know the importance of working together, well,
thank you, Yatzel. This is great. And I would say in the chat for Antonio Martinez, I think that answers your question as well. That was on Venezuela in specific and Latin America from Yatzel Roman. So next we move to sign up Sulayama Umar, and who's been so kind to actually put the Copenhagen Democracy Summit background. So kudos for that sign up, and look forward to hearing from you too.
Thank you. It's a wonderful good evening. It's a good, wonderful good evening to everyone, and it's beautiful to be here with everyone this evening. Like Derek said, we wish to be in Copenhagen, but it's not possible. But we believe we give it a yeah. We are in Copenhagen right now, and we are on this conversation. Today, democracies face different level of threat across the world. A global summit on democracy of this nature should have broad-based participation of different countries experiencing different democracy different. Also, it will be important for an open conversation that does not seek to indirectly blacklist countries, but rather have a common ground to share experience, mix of older conversation, like to share different experiences, a conversation that includes a mix of older democracies and new or young democracies, and countries in transition and diverse to ensure that there's a balanced conversation and representation across and across each every generation. This is a kind of the conversation that needs to be discussed there. And also, the Biden Global Summit on Democracy is an important convening at this critical time where in the world the old democracies are facing serious threats. A summit of this nature will also highlight the prospect of change for younger democracies like Nigerian to learn from experience of older democracy like the United States of America. These are things I think should also be discussed during this global summit. And also looking at Nigeria being a country where democracy, I feel, is being backslided in different aspects. There are also countries that need to be invited, countries like Tunisia, countries like, we have a lot of countries that we need to invite, that need to be invited to such a summit. Countries like South Africa also need to be invited due to the way their democracy is being like the democracy is being backslided. Also, people at the grassroots, young people who practice democracy, who wants to move the democracy forward in their communities, in their constituencies, in their states, also in their communities, should also be invited to such a summit. Not maybe the president of the state, the governors, and also we need people, prominent people, people that can talk for their people, people that can stand for their people. We know democracy is all about inclusion, so we need inclusiveness in such a summit. People with disability also need to be included in such a summit. If seriously we are talking about inclusion, and if seriously we are talking about democracy, people with disability, young women, young girls, youth also need to be involved in such a summit. Due to time, I think I'll just cut here, then we go on. Thank you.
Thank you, Zainab. Thanks. Really important comments. I now turn to Dan Twining, the president of IRI. I might actually throw in a question here for you. So from the audience, from Hiroaki Nakanisha, that ask if it's possible for the Summit for Democracy to discuss how can democratic countries confront or actually engage / cooperate with autocratic countries, China and Russia. I think that's something we haven't had into the debate yet. So that could also be interesting to get some perspectives on.
Thank you, Jonas. Thank you. I'd be delighted to talk about that. And I will try to mimic Zainab in my brevity. Well done. It's really a pleasure to be here with all of you. I'll just make 5 quick points, Jonas. Really is just to step back and remember where we are. I mean, I think the President of the United States is right to say that there is a global contest underway between democracy and autocracy. Guess what? Republicans believe that just as much as Democrats do, certainly as the president does. And so is to remember that what unites us as open societies is far, far greater than what divides us, right? And in terms of who's a democracy, what's an autocracy, you know, I think we don't need to be too scientific here. We know it when we see it. We understand that the greatest challenges to the democratic world today emanate from hostile great power autocracies in China and in Russia, who are projecting authoritarianism abroad. They are assaulting our societies in the West in very active and fundamental ways. They are assaulting our own electoral integrity, our information space, our sovereignty. That's true in Europe and the United States and beyond. So let's remember who our friends are. Let's remember the importance and urgency of democratic unity around the world. And let's remember that despite all of our challenges, we all have democratic institutions and structures that can deal with them in ways that are peaceful and inclusive and lead to great progress. That is not true in authoritarian societies where the writ of one man rules. And that is the fundamental distinction at stake here. That's point one. Point two, why do we care about democracy? One of the previous speakers was right that there's a lot of, you know, agnosticism or cynicism about it out there in our free and open societies. And that's because, frankly, I don't think we've quite focused in on the fact that democratic institutions are essential to all of our goals, whether you care about LGBTQ rights, whether you care about climate change, whether you care about racial and social justice, whatever animates you, your voice will not be heard and your vote will not be counted if you don't live in a democracy. And the more responsive and effective your democratic institutions are, the more they will address the concerns of citizens, the acute concerns of citizens who want to live in a better country and a better world. So let's remember that democratic institutions are the vehicle for social justice and social progress in a way that would just never be true in an autocracy. Point three, Yatzel, it's compelling to hear it from you as a political leader. Democracy is not actually about politicians, it's about people and it's about institutions, right? It's not about one man. Actually, that's the Russian system under Putin's rule. That's the Chinese system under Xi Jinping. A lot of people in those societies don't care for that, by the way. But in any country where democracy is about the leader, that is not in fact a democracy. So civil society plays an essential and valuable and urgent role. In fact, I think it's smarter to think about democracy as a system that includes free courts, independent media, citizen activism, the capacity to organize freely and propound what we care about, and to hold politicians responsible. And by the way, when politicians do not behave themselves, we vote them out and we vote in new leadership, right? That's the essence of what brings us together as small d Democrats. Two more quick points, Jonas. I know we'll have a lot more time to talk about them. Just the dangers of techno-authoritarianism. I so appreciate the Copenhagen Summit declaration that techno-authoritarianism really is one of the three urgent items for us to rally around together to confront. That in many respects, the greatest dangers to democracy emanate in the digital space, where authoritarians have hijacked the debate. That's true of domestic extremists and forms of social extremism that we see online in our own societies and how those amplify in politics and in public discourse. It's also very much true when we look at what China and Russia together are trying to do to the global internet, which is to balkanize it, to control it, to carve it up from the idea of a free and open, endless intellectual frontier, an open forum for everybody to be part of. They want to control it, just like they want to control their own people. And so I think there's an urgent role in the Summit of Democracies, Summit for Democracy, and for all democratic actors to stand up for internet freedom and openness and really to form new coalitions to sustain democratic discourse and democratic practice online. Finally, last point. You know, it's easy to say all of this stuff. The President of the United States has been saying many terrific things. Other leaders, we're hearing, you know, a new global call for democratic leadership. It's much harder to do them, right? And so I would just like to point out a few inconvenient facts, which is that the abandonment of Afghanistan is going to lead to perhaps the greatest human rights catastrophe we will have seen in the past decade or more. We've already seen it with the, you know, the assault on this school that blew up 50 girls studying yesterday. We're going to see a lot more of that. And so I think we should watch that space. We should also look at things like Nord Stream 2. It's easy for European leaders to say, yes, we should all recommit to democracy. But gosh, by doing that in the way that undercuts democratic institutions and practices in countries like Ukraine, and that strengthens Putin, who is a great enemy of Europe, who's a great enemy of the EU and of human freedom in the West, that's a mistake. Finally, I would just point to the China trade. You know, the European Union signed a China investment agreement just a couple weeks, I mean, a matter of days before President Biden took power, wanting to restore transatlantic unity and focus on the values component of what makes us an amazing set of transatlantic allies. So leaders aren't going to be able to have it both ways. And so I think for all the focus and appropriate attention on the need for democracies to act and to protect our societies against authoritarians, we need to do a little more to walk the walk. And that includes the leaders who will be attending the summit. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Dan. That was great, and that, of course, I think you were already going that way, but it did also answer the question we had. I would actually keep you on with another question we have here in the chat, where Colombe has actually already given her reply in the chat, but I thought it was interesting about in countries where there's an opposition figure, for example, Bobby Wine in Uganda, which I think you also had an IRI event recently, if I recall correctly. Is it him that we invite, or is it Museveni? And so I think this is a good sort of discussion for the panel. What are your thoughts and let's be very specific. Let's stay with Uganda. Who should be invited to a summit for democracy from there?
Sorry, Jonas, who was that for?
That was for you. I was, yeah. For you, Dan. So, sorry.
I'll be honest, I mean, I haven't seen the guest list. Derek may have more information. I'm worried about turning this into a giant protocol exercise. And I don't think it should be a giant protocol exercise. I think there should be democratically elected leaders, and there should be a very strong civil society component. if I were just doing a back of the envelope, I would say that an easy way to do this would be the US, NATO, Asian allies that are all open societies, and then specific partners in the developing world. I do think it becomes dangerous when we start turning this into a great protocol exercise. The other thing I would say, obviously, my colleagues have all mentioned it, is that countries need to make some commitments themselves and meet some commitments themselves for coming to this summit, right? So there's a sort of a selection bias in favor of countries that feel like they are able to commit to democratic principles in order to attend this summit. And I would just raise the question whether the leader of Uganda would be able to make those commitments.
Good point. Actually, Colombe, I'll let you also jump in on that, because I could see in the chat you actually have an initiative in this where you're explaining it with a letter, right, about having opposition leaders join in.
Yeah, so basically at the moment we're targeting the G7 to ask them to start talking about the idea of a League of Democracies. And we're targeting them not because we think it's the 7 countries that should start a League of Democracies, definitely not, but because it could create a momentum around the idea. And I think the Summit of Democracies would be another moment for democracies to unite and to start working together. So I differ on what Daniel just said on, a few other selected partners in the developing world. For me, every single democratic country in the world should be invited. And in the event that you're not a democratic country, opposition leaders and civil society need to be invited to be able to represent people that are not otherwise represented. I think it's fundamental that this doesn't turn into yet another US-led Western powers type of event that are completely outdated, that the world will not follow, no respect, as we have seen, for example, with the data you shared on the Alliance of Democracies website. And so that's why, for example, now what we're doing is we are writing a letter to G7 leaders, and we're also then targeted at the Summit of Democracies that is signed by opposition leaders, both from politics, from civil society, from the arts sector and so on, asking world leaders that are in democratic countries to listen to them, to include them in discussions about democracy across the world, and to take action to make sure that freedom fighters are respected. I think it's fundamental to include opposition leaders for non-democratic countries to be able to have, or people in non-democratic countries to be able to have a voice.
Thank you, Colombe. We're having a couple of other interesting questions. One, I think, basically just about how do we make the distinctions? Finn Lau is saying, although some countries are clearly autocratic, how do we determine if a country is truly democratic? I mean, he's actually so kind to refer to our democracy perception index, but I would say that one is probably not a good index for that, because it's people's perceptions. Meaning that you can have a good number of Chinese to think that their country is democratic, which we still wouldn't think. I would say rather maybe be the Economist Index or Freedom House. That would be some of the leading on that. But Lisbeth, maybe you, any thoughts on that? Like where do we draw the lines sort of among democracies? Dan had some ideas there, but I would also love to hear yours.
Well, I think we could also refer to the VDEM Institute, Priorities of Democracy, who are doing a great job in measuring democracies globally. I talked about inclusion. I think it's crucial if we want to see change happening global, that it does not become an exclusive group of already agreed family members. So I think you need to find a balance somewhere between making sure, and as Colombe says, representation, then we have technology hopefully to be used that we can have much more than a political leader of a certain country to attend, but populations representing countries and having a voice there. So I think it's you need to find a balance where we want commitments, but we want to see change. Otherwise, why meet? It's because we think that we have a point about democracy and we would like more countries to embrace it. And we know populations are wanting to embrace democracy. So how do we move towards change? I think there's been many international efforts in different ways. We can talk about climate change and the co-op and how they've been trying to gather momentum, and that has worked sometimes and less other times. And I think we need to see new ways instead of naming and shaming. I don't think that will move us forward as a whole in it. So I don't think there's a simple answer to it. I think we need to inspire, to motivate, and also to push countries that it's a summit that you do not want to not be part of, even if you have troubles and you have some mess in your own house. You need to go there and be there, and hopefully that will help us all to clear up, because we all have things to be done in our houses. There's not no house is perfect around the world.
Thanks, Lisbeth. I had a question I cannot find, but I can remember it. So I don't know who asked it, but you're out there. That's compared it to Madeleine Albright's The Community of Democracies back and said at that time it was really a lot about democracy promotion, and now there's also much more focus on what we do at home and backsliding. So Derek, maybe your thoughts on that, the balance between also still the democracy promotion aspect and at the same time sort of making sure our own house is in order, so to speak, how we achieve that balance. And let me throw you one more here, which is by Dylan. Can the summit achieve any concrete action in which democratic nation states can hold accountable nation states like Russia, China, and others for human rights abuses? So I think those two I'll roll over your way.
Right. Well, thank you, Jonas. Look, I don't think, as I said in my opening remarks, I don't think it's an either or. I think we do have to come with some humility about what goes on in our own democracies to show that we are committed, and none of us is perfect. So we are committed, and we're putting some skin in the game, as we say, in committing ourselves to be stronger and better democracies going forward. But that doesn't mean that we have to wait for that in our own countries before we work together to support democracy abroad. And we like to say it's democracy promotion, yes, but it's also democracy support. And there are people around the world, the billions of people, frankly, who are struggling for a voice, who are struggling for justice, who are struggling for the rights that they have been promised in most part, but are not being provided by their leaders, who want to feel the solidarity of the folks here around this so-called table here in the screen and those watching, that we can have strength in our numbers. Now, I would like to see coming out of this, I mean, there will be a division between those countries that are donor countries, as it were, more developed democracies, and those who are more developing democracies, though we're all developing democracies in a way, but I'm talking about economic developing countries. And I would like to see those more developed countries put more skin in the game in terms of support for democracy around the world, together with others, in partnership with others. You mentioned Taiwan. Taiwan's wonderful, but they don't give enough to their Taiwan Foundation for Development, for Democracy, or our friends in Japan, who are doing more now in terms of corporate social responsibility. They see the necessity to do more. Can they put more skin in the game in supporting democracy along with those in Europe and those in elsewhere in Asia, et cetera? So I think we have to do both. We have to recognize this is in our interest to strengthen the democratic value infrastructure around the world. And that what we're talking about, yes, is Russia and China to a degree, getting to your second question, in the human rights situations inside the countries. But really what we're about are the norms and the standards that these countries represent. China has its China Standards 2035 initiative to try to shape the standards for the techno-authoritarianism that Dan talked about. They are very strategic in thinking through, okay, we want to get into these international institutions and we want to promote our products in order to shape these standards and norms and values and rules. We have to together, because we are together stronger, need to shape these internationally. And in that way, try to shape these countries as much as working within the countries themselves or working against them, which is why I talked about the affirmative part of the summit. Nothing's going to be solved at one summit or one event, but there should be a common agenda coming out of it, where there are certain standards and norms and processes we will all work on together that we will assume at home, that we will then be held accountable for at home, but then also what we will do together beyond the summit. So we are looking at an ongoing challenge to take on what is both within, but also without.
Thanks, Derek. Let me say to all the people asking questions, if you have also your own ideas, not just questions about how you think, happy put it in. That's a way of raising a hand, and I'm happy also to then Danielle can promote you also to sort of speakers, or you could chip in with that. But otherwise, we'll keep on with the questions in the Q&A. And we do need a little bit more debate. We're almost too much in agreement for people that love discussion. So here is one where I know there's disagreement. So it's, dear Daniel, techno-authoritarianism, so it's to Dan Twining. Techno-authoritarianism, do we talk about Xi and Putin only, or also Mark Zuckerberg? Let me hear your thoughts on that question.
Well, that's such an interesting question. I'd like to know what the speaker thinks. I mean, yes, I think in all of our societies, you know, Jonas, I was struck by this, by the survey that you all put out in the run up to this summit, showing that really people all over the democratic world have acute concerns about the social media companies and about online discourse. And I would note that I think you pointed out that the highest level of concern was actually in the United States, about the power of the big tech companies. Of course, we know that this is an acute level of concern in Europe because the European Commission is trying to change the way they operate, right, for better or for worse. Yes, I think we may look back on this period, the last 10, 20 years, as kind of a Wild West era in social media, and that things will change. Of course, the question becomes, does that turn into sort of a form of authoritarianism in itself, which is censoring political speech in free and open societies, which is actually not acceptable in a free and open society, right? So this is a very complex subject. I know all of my colleagues here have thoughts on this, but in fact, yes, we cannot allow extremist discourse on social media to poison our own democracies. That's a totally different problem, by the way, than people in China have, which is the inability to speak freely at all in any online forum. You know, when Clubhouse was able to operate in China very, very briefly for just a period of days here, within the last month or two, Chinese people, for the first time in many of their lifetimes, for young people, were exposed to a global internet-based conversation. And the Chinese authorities saw that, and guess what they did? They immediately shut it down and banned Clubhouse from operating because it was a venue that they could not control, right? And so that's a very different problem set. But of course, who wants to live in a society where the authoritarians control your conversation? By the way, the Chinese want to export that censorship. They've personally sanctioned Derek Mitchell and me. They've also institutionally sanctioned NDI and IRI, the organizations we lead, for speaking out for the rights of people in Hong Kong. By the way, rights which were guaranteed by the Chinese government that signed an international treaty with the United Kingdom protecting those rights. So what the Chinese leadership wants to do is suppress speech and freedom of thought, not only in China, they actually want to do it around the world, and we need to resist that.
Thank you, Dan. Yeah, and I can concur. I mean, our own foundation, the Alliance of Democracy Foundation, was also put on the Chinese sanctions list as a sort of retaliation step for when the EU sanctioned, for the first time in a very, very long time, 3 decades since Tiananmen, sanctioned China for human rights abuses. And it's kind of paradoxical of then sanctioning a democracy organization for a sort of retaliation, but definitely that's happening, and it's something that I mean, even though we as you take it as a badge of honor, it does have a certain chill effect on business and others that are cooperating for a reason. So completely agree that this is part of what we need to also stand up to together. Vice Minister Yatza, there's a question for you from Katerina Fernandez. What can you say about the actual political crisis in Haiti? It brings you, of course, a little bit next door to your neighbor. Can you talk about democracy there? I do understand if there are certain limitations on what you can do now as a minister, but at least it's posed here in the question, and would be an interesting reflection on democracy in the region.
Yeah, I know it can be a little bit controversial speaking as a vice minister on the happenings of the country with which we share an island, but we've been very open about this. And let me be completely clear, democracy is not working in Haiti. Of course, there's the history of dictatorships. We had the Duvalier family, Papa Doc, Baby Doc, and then we had different coup d'etats against President Jean-Bertrand Aristide. And for the past 17 years, Haiti has had elected governments mostly. However, their democratic system is not working. At my former words, I mentioned how much I enjoyed Borgen and the going-ons of the parliamentary system in Europe. But sadly, the semi-presidential system, mostly inspired by the French system that is going on in Haiti, has not worked. We have a president that is elected by the people, and he has to nominate a prime minister that has to be then voted on by the parliament. However, here's the problem. About 19% of the electorate is the one that votes in Haiti. So we have different organizations that with perhaps representation of 1, 2, 3% of the population have the ability to block the nominations of the prime ministers. When you do not have a prime minister that has been voted on by the parliament, then you do not have you do not have parliamentary initiative. When you do not have parliamentary initiative, you cannot approve the budget. When you cannot approve the budget, then you cannot get the aid assistance that is vital for things such as nutrition. And Haiti in the year 2019 reached over 40% of malnutrition for their citizens. In Haiti, you can form a political party with about 20 signatures. So there's 285 political parties that hate each other. You cannot bring them together. So there has been the paralysis of the executive and the legislature. But even beyond that, in the year 2020, because they have not been able to hold elections, then Haiti abolished, or I should say annulled, the parliament, except for the mandates of 10 parliamentarians. So the president is currently governing by decree, which was supposed to be temporary, but it's been over a year. So that is a big problem. Haiti was supposed to hold a constitutional referendum in April, then was supposed to hold it in June, was not able to constitutional referendum to reform their system. I think we can mostly agree that the semi-presidential system does not work in Haiti, but sadly that referendum was closely linked to the president, who, as Mr. Twining mentioned, when a country is mostly debated on regarding the leader, the personality, then there are big problems. And that meant that the referendum was not able to be held. Haiti is supposed to hold presidential, local, legislative elections this year, and there is no visible path to holding them. They do not have the funds. Sadly, the international community seems to be fed up with what's happening in Haiti, and I cannot stress this even more. Please, if you're listening, representatives from the international community, do not get tired of Haiti. Haiti needs help, and of course, democratic institutions and governability will not be the end-all, be-all solution to what's happening in Haiti. But so long as there are no Republican institutions that work, so long as we do not have governments that can actually enact reforms, Haiti will not be solved, and we will be seeing more crisis in the Western Hemisphere. We will be seeing more exodus in the Western Hemisphere, as we have seen with Venezuela, as we're seeing in other countries, such as the Northern Triangle, which I know is a big priority for the United States. I know it's a big priority for IRI and NDI, which have wonderful programs in the Northern Triangle. But please do not forget what's happening in Haiti, because mark my words, if nothing is done, it will be a much bigger problem for all of us in the Western Hemisphere and beyond.
Thank you, Yatzel. I would bring here, which is not really a question, but an observation from Humberto from Paraguay that says greetings. And this is, so it's all of us, that is an interesting conversation. And will there not be more conversation spaces on this topic in the future? So maybe we should take that along, and we will make a clubhouse where we meet each second week and continue the debate and try to bring in more and more people on this. I think that may be part of our commitment to bringing in civil society. Zainab, I wanted to bring you also back into the debate. Here is a question from Ulya Kasmi, which I think is interesting about the summit, the sort of the balance between introspect and address the reason for democracy in trouble, such as increase in inequality, or will you just focus on sanctions on the authoritarian regimes? I, of course, don't think it's that binary, but I think it's a good kind of question. Is again, it's also from you, from Nigeria. What do you think would then be the most important thing that would actually improve democracy in Nigeria if that the summit could address? Sign up, you're on mute. Yeah, there you are.
Okay, I believe from my own side, if at all there's inclusive governance, there's inclusion in the system, I believe there will be it will be one of the things that will make democracy move in my country. But Nigeria is a country where we claim to participate in democracy, but at all is not something like that. I believe if at all people will come out, if truly we are talking about democracy, if truly Nigeria is a country where democracy is being practiced, there should be a space for everybody to bring out their participate in their fundamental human rights. As for example, let's take for example, there's a protest in Nigeria that happened, I think, in 2020, which is the EndSARS protest, where youth come out to protest for what they believe is their right. To me, I believe protest is also a right. Each and every citizen has the right to protest. And most of these people who come out to protest for what they believe is not right, what they believe the government need to do something that will push for their own benefit. Most of these youth were killed in the process, which I believe is not something that should be so. And also, if at all we want democracy to move well in Nigeria, there should be women to participate more in politics. Looking at where young women are not being given opportunity to go into politics. I come from a community where women are being left behind, especially in every part or in every aspect in the country, especially politics. Women are being left behind. Women are not given the chance to voice out what they wish to voice out for. I come from an Islamic community. I come from a community where women are not given chances. If at all women will be given chance to participate in politics, to participate in governance, women are be given political appointment. I believe it will also help in pushing the democracy forward. We have about 360 House of representative member in Nigeria in the National Assembly, where we have about just 79 women, which I believe is very, very low. If at all more women will be given chance, if youth will be given chance. I contested in an election, I lost my election, but that didn't stop me. You winning election is not something that, okay, if I win election and I didn't do something that is supposed to be done, it's not what is supposed to be done. If at all women will be given chance to participate and contest and run for election, it will also help. We have youth who have the aim and zeal to run for office, but they can't go into politics because they are scared. They feel it's a rough space for them. Women are violence everywhere. This is something I need. That's why I said, that's why, like Jonas said earlier, Nigeria voted 80%. Yes, they need to vote because they believe that democracy is not working well in Nigeria. We need people at the grassroots to work for democracy. Democracy is not all about us coming and talking all the time, maybe, or in Nigeria, people come together, talk. It's not there. Democracy needs to go deep down the grassroots. It needs to start from the grassroots. We need the grassroots people to come into politics. I remember in 2019, I participated in the Copenhagen Democracy Summit. I'm from a community, I was picked up from the grassroots to go and discuss with other democracy defenders in order to bring changes in my community, and which is some of the things we are doing now. If people go into my Twitter handle, if you are with me in my community, if you are here in Nigeria, we do a lot of work in order to push democracy forward. Like, even if you look at all these rape cases and other things that are happening in this country, if at all our democracy, our government is moving in the right direction, I believe there will not be such issues more. I think, Jonas, I'll stop here.
No, it's great, sign up. I was actually going to ask you a follow-up question, because if we talk about that each country should come with commitments, what for you would be the 1, 2, 3 things that you think Nigeria should kind of sign up to that would be the best improvement and that would give them kind of the entrance ticket to as a country to a Biden Summit of Democracy? What would then be the big things that would make a real change on the ground when you're talking about what matters for grassroots?
one, if at all people will be opportune and given the chance to vote for who they want to vote for, I think it will help. Because one, if you look at the democracy in Nigeria, somebody will come, like Daniel said earlier, he said, if a politician is not giving you what you want, you vote him out. But in Nigeria, it's not like that. You can't just vote somebody out. You can't even recall person back to his community, his constituency if he's not doing what is right. We need a lot. We need the Nigeria need people to come. We need to have an open conversation, like I said earlier, and also the government also should be part of the conversation, because they are the people bringing most of these problems ahead. And also political thuggery, I believe, is one of the things we need to bring back down. And if also we'll talk about vote buying also is one of the things that is breaking Nigerian democracy down. Someone who said, okay, I want to contest for an office, and you said, okay, even if people didn't vote for me, I will buy votes. People sell their votes as low as $1 in Nigeria to vote for someone, which is something we need to fight for, which is something we need to talk about. So if at all Nigeria will include the youth, if at all Nigeria will include women in politics, if at all Nigeria will include people with disability, all in all, what I'm trying to say, if at all there's inclusion in Nigeria, democracy will definitely work the way it should.
Thanks, Zainab. That's great. I had a question. I'm just scrolling through them here that I thought I wanted to bring in. Derek and Colombe. Okay, now I can't find it, but I know what it was about. It was about human rights defenders and how we could do more for them, basically at the summit. So Derek, that's your daily bread and butter. So what would be any kind of new steps that could be taken at such a summit to protect the democracy defenders?
Yeah, when you say human rights defenders, democracy defenders, there's an overlap, but not precisely the same. But there is.
Yeah, and now I see that the person Elon Natumanya asked actually democracy defenders. So I'll use the phrasing you ask in the question, so that I don't necessarily that was.
So what can be done at the summit to defend, to promote and support them? You're saying. Well, first of all, it is, as we were saying, I think, to include them, bring them to the table, give them the voice, and demonstrate that it's not just a nice thing to do, that, as stated, democracy comes from the grassroots up. This is not about the politicians. It's about the citizens. And I used to say, I mean, we say this in America, I said it when I was ambassador, that democracy doesn't stop on election day. That's not the only time you have a voice. It's not the only time, it's like, okay, you voted for representatives, now sit down and shut up. No, democracy is every day holding your elected officials accountable and ensuring there's transparency, et cetera. So, I mean, one of the key pillars of the summit, from what I understand, and something we haven't talked about, we've talked around, is the issue of corruption. That anti-corruption is going to be a very, very important part of the summit, and thinking through what that means and ensuring that that is a commitment made by all, for whether it is debt transparency or financial transparency or digital security, data security, all these things that allow people both their own personal security and ensure that their leadership and their representatives are not corrupting the system, either financially or politically. And I think that's absolutely essential, that there be things in place, that there be a community working to basically use it as a price of admission. These are standards that we will expect from anyone who comes to the table, who will aspire to ensure that these transparency measures are in place, and that they empower civil society, they empower free media, they empower parliaments, which sometimes are forgotten in all of this, to oversee the executive, and to ensure that when a system is putting a country, or leadership is putting a country into debt, that the citizens know what's going on, that they accept that, and that there's not corruption at the most senior levels. This is, I think this is essential. I think figuring out how you, again, persist in whoever is at the table, how you continue that partnership. Use the summit as a launching point for an agenda. That too is very important. And then they have the imprimatur of the summit behind them. to say that this is credible in terms of what a democracy agenda looks like. It has to include the civil society and the democracy defenders. So that's just some of the few ideas I think we need to do to defend. By turn to Colombe.
No, I completely agree with this. I think I would add just a couple of points. I like the word democracy defender. It's something I don't hear a lot. The first one is if the democracies and countries are actually able to come together and coordinate responses, I think sanctions, whether economic or diplomatic, to protect democracy defenders would have more strength. I think second, they would need to be provided with a safe haven. So we work with a lot of democracy defenders at now, both in democratic countries and who are still at risk in their own countries, and they often struggle to be able to even get to safety, without even talking about working with governments in assisting them in thinking about the sanctions, about the responses, and so on that government should have towards authoritarian countries. And I think that's the last element. It would be for democratic countries and for any alliance that would come out of a summit to work directly with democracy defenders, not to sidelight them, but to actually listen to the concerns they have and to the knowledge they have to be able to better the state of democracy abroad. And I think I would add one point. I was just thinking about it when I read the question. Democracy defender is a very interesting word. And what you include in it is very interesting. So also look, I go back to my point about holding one another accountable in countries that are considered democratic. Would whistleblowers about democratic practices be included in those democracy defenders? And then how do we respond to certain countries cracking down on whistleblowers in the first place? That would be the part for me of any league, alliance, or whatever you call it, of democracies. That would be important in actually holding each other accountable and leading by example instead of just focusing the attention outside. And I just wanted to add one word on what Zainab said. 100% agreed with everything. And it's been proven, I think, that more female leaderships and parity in politics actually leads to better democratic practices, and that more young people just needed to be able to shape the future of the world. So let's go. Let's get 50% of women in power across the world, at least.
That sounds good. I wanted on the democracy defenders or champions, just to mention today at the summit, we had some really, really strong testimonies from Tianovskaya from Belarus, Nathan Law from Hong Kong, and YY Nu from Myanmar. So if you didn't see those really brings home why we need to protect democracy defenders. We had a freedom of expression panel as well, where I thought it also really showed for particularly people that use their freedom of expression but actually end up under 24 protection because of what they said. So that's also another category of people that really needs protection. I wanted to bring, and I can also getting signals here from Danielle that we're getting to our closing time. A suggestion that I also put in the chat to a questionnaire about, and which we included in the Copenhagen Charter for an Alliance of Democracies, which I think Danielle has just sent around in the chat, and maybe Q&A to everybody, both among speakers and there we suggested civil society, that you could have actually small civil society or civil society formed all around the globe at the same time as the summit. So that would definitely answer a little bit the question that Colombe was saying in the beginning. There shouldn't any longer be a completely just US led sort of phenomenon, and that way you could really bring in and saying it should be a global, since it's also called a global summit for democracy. You could have all over the world sort of simultaneous. And now with what we're doing right now with technology, it's become even more possible. So that could maybe be a very sort of concrete thing to explore, that we could do this. We could do this even bigger. I'd actually thought that we would even see more of the people. But it was great you all participated in the chat. And it was only here at the end I saw somebody who said, I would like to be promoted to speaker as well and share. We'll do that some other time, because now we're getting towards our closing. And I also see questions we haven't answered. That's how the democratic debate is. It goes on. And so I'm really just delighted that we did this, and I think this is just basically just the beginning. We need all these voices to chip in. If it has to be a global summit for democracy, then that has to be a big part of it. That there are just so many voices that add in. What does democracy, what does civil liberty, what does that all that mean for them in their daily life? So I'm delighted to. Yeah, and it's precisely 8 o'clock. So I'm at least in Denmark, different times around the globe. So I'm starting here in my corner where I see people. So Lisbeth Pilago, thanks a lot for joining in. Colombe, thanks a lot to you as well. Sign up, thanks for joining in as well. Yetzel Roman as well. We've been almost all around the world. Dan Twining, Derek Mitchell. It's been a real pleasure. And again, this debate will continue. And I was actually serious when I said, so let's talk about that. If we should maybe make a clubhouse where we continue these democracy debates and try to bring in as many people and as a broad perspectives. Unfortunately, as Dan Twining mentioned, we can't bring in Chinese any longer after the Chinese regime figured out that the Chinese were having too much fun on Clubhouse. But maybe there next time, at least from this part here of the Copenhagen Democracy Summit. A big thanks to you all.
Thanks, Jonas. Bravo. Bye, everyone.
So much.
You have a wonderful day.
Gracias.
Bye.